Good evening, and welcome to the fourth event in the Davis Museum's virtual artist talk series, Handmade Photography Today. My name is Carrie Cushman, and I am the Linda Wyatt Gruber, class of 1966 Curatorial Fellow in Photography at the Davis. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome the artist Will Wilson, who will be speaking about his work representing the varied identities, values, and customs of contemporary Native American communities in tintypes. We begin with a native land acknowledgement. The Davis Museum at Wellesley College is located on the ancestral and unceded tribal lands of the Massachusetts people. We acknowledge the continuing presence of the Massachusetts and their relatives and neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, and pay respect to Indigenous elders, past and present. To participate in today's program, please note that the event is being recorded and will be made available online in the coming days. We are using a webinar format, and your microphone and video have been turned off during the presentation. Throughout the event, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to enter your questions and to upvote other people's questions. We will leave 20 minutes for questions at the end of the presentation. The Davis Museum is grateful to the Burns Schwartz Family Foundation for sponsoring the Handmade Photography Today Artist Talk series. We would also like to acknowledge our co-hosts, the Photographic Resource Center. Located at Wellesley University, the Photographic Resource Center hosts exhibitions, presentations, and gatherings that support the creation and understanding of light-based media, with the goal of inspiring its members, educational institutions, and the photography community with new work, ideas, and methods. For more information, please visit prcboston.org. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'm thrilled to announce that with the continued support of the Burns Schwartz Family Foundation and the PRC, we will be continuing the Handmade Photography Today series in 2021 with a focus on portraits of place. From February to May, the Davis Museum will host virtual conversations with the acclaimed artists Zora Opoku, Pushpamala N., Gerardo Suter, and David Benjamin Sherry. We look forward to the second part of the Handmade Photo series, which will confront a range of pressing issues related to the role of cultural memories and visual archives in contemporary formations of place. Please stay tuned for more information in the new year. And now for tonight's program. Our discussant for this evening is Dr. Elena Creef, Professor of Women's and Gender Studies at Wellesley College, where she teaches courses that include my favorite, Techno-Orientalism, Geisha Robots, Cyberpunk Warriors, and Asian Futures, Rainbow Cowboys and Cowgirls in the Multicultural American West, Asian Women in Film, and Native Women's and Others. She is the author of Imagining Japanese America, The Visual Construction of Citizenship, Nation, and the Body from NYU Press, and the forthcoming Shadow Traces, Looking at Japanese Women in Photograph Archives from Illinois University Press. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Will Wilson. Wilson's art projects center around the continuation and transformation of customary Indigenous cultural practice. He is a Dina photographer and trans-customary artist who spent his formative years living on the Navajo Nation. Wilson studied photography, sculpture, and art history at the University of New Mexico, where he earned an MFA in photography in 2002, and Oberlin College, where he earned a BA in studio art and art history. In 2007, Wilson won the Native American Fine Art Fellowship from the Edeljorg Museum. In 2010, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Award for Sculpture, and in 2016, the Pollock Krasner Foundation Grant for Photography. Wilson has held visiting professorships at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Oberlin College, and the University of Arizona. In 2017, Wilson received the New Mexico Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts. His work is exhibited and collected internationally. Wilson is currently program head of photography at Santa Fe Community College. And now I will pass it over to Will. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Carrie. And I'd like to say thank you to the Davis and to folks at Wellesley, Arthurina Fears in particular, and then, of course, Dr. Creef, who I'll be having a conversation with. Um, all right. Um, so this our starting presentations off with this image lately. It's close to my heart, and it also, I think, speaks to, the idea that photography can tell a lot of different stories from a lot of different perspectives. And I think it also shows just in my kind of worldview how much change has gone on in such a short period of time. So I imagine this picture was taken about 60 years ago, and the images of three sisters and their children, and the the young lady in the foreground is actually my mother, Lola at City. And they ran across Ray Manley, who is an editorial photographer based in Tucson, Arizona, who kind of created this image. And then there was an exchange of money, and kind of he asked them to pose as if they were taking water from this kind of dirty roadside source. They were well provisioned. They were on their way to town. But I don't know. It's just a bit mind-boggling to me how much change has occurred in such a short amount of time. Um, so I kind of fell in love with photography when I started studying in high school. And originally, I think the documentary kind of mode really spoke to me. I wanted to tell stories about life on the Navajo Nation with my family and friends. And that was the focus of the work, and I think I was kind of encouraged to continue that work. Later, I went to Oberlin College and started kind of thinking a little bit more critically about the history of photography in relation to Indigenous folks, and you know um, not wanting to reproduce or replicate that some of that problematic history. Um, so installation art became my kind of way to share this imagery, but also kind of change the relationship between the viewer and the people that I was representing, kind of a protection space, or a way to transform the experience of the viewer. Um, then I went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque to get my MFA in photography, and kind of continued this more critical understanding, I think, of the way that my work was operating. I think one strategy that I've kind of thought about in relation to work is that, if there's a problematic kind of process or history, I need to investigate it by actually kind of reproducing that form in some level and trying to work through what I guess I see is a negative practice before I can kind of move through it completely. And I came across an article by Alan Sekula, The Body in the Archive, and that really kind of, for me, became an important work to think about the history of photography in relation to my own work. This is the MFA show at the University of New Mexico. Um, and again, installation is an important kind of, I think, way to frame the work and also filter the experience of the work. Um, Later, I adopted a digital practice, as many of us kind of felt that we needed to. This is from a series called Autoimmune Response, which kind of addresses, I think, environmental degradation on the nation, and then also trying to think about how to process photography subject. Um, so the work is based on the the view of a protagonist kind of in this space. Um, and them trying to figure out how to respond to the kind of toxicity of this environmental um, place and site. Something that I think is important to me in relation to this kind of project is thinking about extraction and resource extraction on the reservation, and what the implications and kind of historical legacy of that are. I also, in this image, I'm referring to the Navajo creation story. There are these hero twins born of water and monster slayer who um, rid the world of kind of evils that allow for us, the human race, to kind of inhabit this space now. So um, that work was again installation based. I think one thing that really was exciting about this new digital possibility was kind of the large scale photography became much you know easier to produce essentially. Um, so this work, it continues today, but in the post-apocalyptic world, you need to have shelter as well as food, and so this architectural form, the hogan, becomes a greenhouse for the cultivation of indigenous food species. Um, so I guess in a lot of ways, I think of artists as people who have a certain capacity to imagine kind of solutions to complex problems, and I like to imagine that one day I will actually kind of put this into practice. Um, this is an image that starts to involve other people, also from the Autoimmune Response series. And then also at this kind of really important site for me and my family, it's the confluence of the Little Colorado and Colorado rivers. Um, and then, I think particularly germane to this exhibition, this is now me exploring a new form or process. This is the wet plate process. It's kind of the third photographic process in the history of photography, and it's also the process of the era when kind of Western expansion was going on, and there's a history of Western survey and landscape that I think I'm trying to evoke with this process. I'm also interested in kind of blending technologies, and so when I shoot these images or these wet plate tintypes, I'm also shooting in digital so that I can blend those techniques and histories together. Um, this is a little bit of a departure, but I think it kind of speaks to the notion of handmade photography. I also have a public art practice. Um, I'm interested in the materiality possibilities of photography. And, a pixel is a digital square of color. And in this project, my collaborator and I, Josh Titus, used a 20 millimeter square of glass to as our pixels. And when you aggregate a million of these, you end up with large scale glass photographs, essentially. So community-based project in Tucson, Arizona, kind of honoring the residents of a neighborhood called Barrio Anita. And so in the end, we kind of created this, pretty substantial football field long glass photograph that was about 20 feet high. And our goal was also to help shield the community from the interstate that was directly behind this. This is kind of Tile Pile 2.0. We actually had software written in order to kind of achieve um, the the capacity to kind of map these pixels and produce this work. This is in Philadelphia, um, and so a lot of my work does kind of center around, I think, customary indigenous practice in one way or another, and trying to kind of filter that material through through new forms. And that's where this notion of trans customary comes in. But so I was able to take a weaving that my grandmother did and kind of transform that in a collaborative process with a few other artists, and we wove a a traditional Navajo textile, except we incorporated these QR codes. And if I can, I'll share this short video with you. So the one aspect of the design that we transformed were these codes, and this becomes an interactive piece. Um, and this is about 2.5 minutes long. All right. And that brings us, I guess, to this project, which is called the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange. Um, and in this project that is ongoing, that I've been doing since 2012, actually, um, I essentially set up a photo booth or a portrait studio, and I'm using this historical photographic process called wet plate. It's definitely handmade. You have to have a dark room on site with you because you're essentially making your own film, and the emulsion has to stay wet throughout the whole process. So if it dries, you will not get an image. And you have about a 15-minute window to kind of set your subject up, make the exposure, and then get into the dark room. And the great thing about that is it actually enables me to share the process and the image making with the subject. And so I walk them through that process. And actually, in the end, I gift the original photograph to the sitter in exchange for a scan of it. So if you sit and have this kind of exchange with me, you walk away with a nice, tintype of yourself. And the image I'm showing now is actually kind of where the project started. I was approached by the organization that runs the Santa Fe Indian Market to create an image of this beautiful necklace, the squash blossom necklace, which was created by 13 different artists and donated to the organization. And it was, every year they have a fundraising dinner, and it supports a scholarship at the Institute of American Indian Arts. But this, it kind of created a project that I remain kind of actively engaged with today. Another kind of, I think, important rationale for this project was the first known photographs of Navajo or Dene people were when we were essentially prisoners of war during the Long Walk or the Huilde, which, it was this kind of genocidal campaign launched against Navajo folks in the middle of the 19th century. And then it's also, I think maybe I should go back to this image, a little bit of a speak back to the kind of history of Edward Curtis's North American Indian Project. And, in this image, for example, Joe Horse Capture, who's actually now at the Autry, he saw my iPad sitting there next to me, and he asked me if it was active, and he brought up this image, and it's a little bit hard to read in the photograph, but that's a picture of Horse Capture, who was Joe's great 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 grandfather, and it was shot by Edward Curtis. Um, so my project is about kind of photographing Indigenous people today who are doing kind of interesting and important cultural work. Kathleen Ash Milby was a curator at the National Museum of the American Indian, and now she's at the Portland Art Museum. Cara Romero is an amazing photographer in her own right. And she also does a kind of important environmental activist work with an organization called Bioneers. This is Kevin Gover, who is the director of NMAI. Nicholas Glennon, who is doing some really important work. He was in the Whitney Biennial this year, and is doing some pretty extraordinary kind of production. So, this project is ongoing. I really do love the exchange part of it, the ability to kind of have a conversation about what it means to create a portrait of oneself in collaboration with a photographer. Something else that I've always kind of dreamed about when looking at kind of historic images, especially of Indigenous folks, is to kind of wonder what they would want to say. I think the power of that Curtis work is really about it being a portrait of resilience and the kind of incredible transformation that those folks have lived through. But in that effort to kind of give voice, I've created this thing that I call talking tintypes. So I have this app that you can download for free from the Apple App Store. And there's a section on my website called Talking Tintypes. And so I figured out how to activate these with augmented reality. But once you get the app, and if you have certain images, then you can actually activate them and they will come to life and kind of speak for themselves. So it's about, giving agency back to the sitter in this still form. So I'm really excited about the potential of that kind of pairing of technologies, the 19th century and kind of the evocation of history that that kind of implies, and then the ability with 21st century um, technology to be able to activate that and give kind of agency back to the person. This is actually a collaborative project that I'm working on with uh, a professor of dance at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. And Adam McKinney has put together this amazing set of choreography and costuming and performance in relation to this kind of dark history from Fort Worth. So Fred Rouse was actually, murdered, lynched in 1921 in Fort Worth. And Adam is kind of trying to memorialize this history and kind of speak back to that. So for each of these sites, and we haven't activated them yet, Adam kind of has a specific choreography in relation to those, and it tells the story of this dark time in this man's history. So Fred Rouse was he worked in the meatpacking industry, and he crossed a picket line, and he kind of expected there to be um, some violence. So he brought a gun to work with him to protect himself. And, he did defend himself, but he was kind of overwhelmed by a mob. And he ended up in the hospital. The mob came for him the next day, and this is the actual site of the lynching. And this is the graveyard where Fred Rouse is buried. Not shortly after this project was done, a woman named Atiana Jefferson was murdered by the Fort Worth police in her own home. Um, so, very kind of timely and relevant. Um, and I'm excited to have the honor to work with Adam on that project. Um, a bit of a shift that also kind of refers back to the previous work that autoimmune response stuff, natively calling connecting dots. And this is kind of an exploration of kind of a legacy of extraction of fissile material from the Navajo Nation. So this is a map developed by the Navajo EPA and the US EPA of 521 abandoned uranium mines on the nation. And so, I've kind of embarked on a survey project, kind of thinking about the history of Western landscape and survey. Um, and, if you don't know about it, the United Nuclear Corporation's Church Rock uranium mill spill in 1979 is actually kind of, by the numbers, the worst nuclear accident in US history. And, deeply impactful on the Navajo Nation. Not many folks know about it. This is actually not my image, but it captures a site that I used to play in when I was younger on the reservation. This is the site of the rare metals uranium processing mill. And now today it's a super fun site. So I've started this exploration of these different sites on the reservation, and um, I'm using drones, to get a kind of sky eye view that kind of opens up, I think, the landscape in a new way. And it kind of looks at how these sites are impacting the land. And something to note is it's very, very arid out there, and water is incredibly important. And we all know the mantra "water is life," but I think that's particularly, close to our existence on the Navajo Nation. Um, and these sites are endangering that, so there's the problem of contamination of groundwater. And some of these kind of remediation projects are focused around that. And so these are evaporation ponds. There's plumbing under these sites in some cases when they're remediated, and they're trying to keep that contamination from seeping into the groundwater. This is the Mexican hat disposal cell. You know, I'm fascinated about how drone technology and this, you know, something that came from surveillance and um, can be kind of reused or reframed to image environmental racism and injustice. So this is the kind of like super macro view, and then I'm kind of zooming in. And it's very odd that a number of these sites are kind of memorialized with these plaques or these structures, right? And so this is in the center of that kind of sea of remediation. The Mexican hat site, you know, is somewhere where 4,400,000 tons of radioactive waste is kind of interred. Um, I also have been using this to document kind of current sites. So this is one of the last uranium mills that's active in the United States. And it's very close to the White Mesa Ute Mountain Reservation. Um, and then these are more of the connecting the dots images that I've been kind of exploring. This is Shiprock um, disposal cell in Shiprock, New Mexico. Um, and then, you know, a lot of my work kind of tends to, I think, um, kind of look back at other projects. And so this autoimmune response protagonist is kind of also on the ground, kind of creating this survey. And I'm using, again, the historic photographic process that I think references that era of kind of Western expansion, and then kind of doing a hybrid kind of process with the digital as well. So it's kind of a blend. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's a kind of quick overview of what I've been up to lately, and especially in relation to this exhibition. Um, so I'll stop sharing now, and I think um, invite Elena to join me. Um,
Thank you, Will. That was a really beautiful and exciting tour. I want to thank the Davis Museum for giving me the opportunity to learn about Will's work. I've had a wonderful journey the past month taking a look at his work, and I'm very excited. I have a number of things to say, and I think maybe what I will do is share with everyone a couple of slides that I prepared, and I'm just going to sort of throw out some questions, frame some questions, share some images from some other artists, and then bring it back to a conversation with Will, if that's okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And thank you also the participants who are here today for posting questions in the Q&A, because we'll take a look at those and we'll circle back to your questions and comments later. In an earlier conversation that I had with Will, we talked a little bit about the presence, the towering presence and centrality of Edward Curtis's photography, and for the need, in some ways, in spite of the 150-year anniversary of Curtis's work, to maybe decenter Curtis as the defining photographer of Native people in America. So I just briefly want to make a visual reference to perhaps the most iconic, maybe the most impactful, and maybe the most damaging photograph from the icon. And that is, of course, his turn of the century portrait of Navajo on horseback riding away from the camera, that was problematically titled The Vanishing Race, 1904. So much has been written already about this photograph, and so much has also been heavily critiqued by Native photographers and artists. So we don't need to cover that ground, but I just want to use this as a marker for talking about the ways in which Native Americans have been framed in the US and by the West really through Curtis's lens and through this discourse of the past, of vanishing, of going, gone, and how difficult, how challenging it's been in the 120 years moving forward to shake that, that particular framing. I also want to acknowledge there have been a number of artists of color, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who have engaged in really creative, playful, powerful ways with Edward Curtis's hegemonic stranglehold on Native representation in photography. And this is a South Asian artist who has only come to my attention maybe just the past year, but Anu Palakunathu Matthew, her beautiful series from the early 2000s called Self-Portraits of an Indian from India series, in which she takes iconic turn of the century, early 20th century portraits, including Curtis's, of Native people. And then she restages the photograph in tintype form, using herself in costume, sometimes cross-gender, sometimes cross-racial, to sort of talk back, speak back. In this series, you have on the left, white man and Indian, and then you have Anu on the right, reconfigured in her self-portrait, Indian and white man. But the series is beautiful. Her work is online if you want to make a note of her name and track down that work. Also playing with the long-standing confusion between Indians from India and Native Americans. So anyway, I am riveted, fascinated by wet plate technology and tintypes. And thanks to Will, I feel like I got a beautiful crash course education in this old school early photography form. I also want to point out that wet plate technology is one of the earliest photography technologies and has its peak moment between 1851 and 1880. And as a cultural historian, that time frame really jumps out at me because, of course, I think of the 1850s to the 1880s as the most brutal chapter in American history, in which there was a concerted effort to go to war with Native people and nations, to round them up, to really relocate and also exterminate. So I find it interesting. This technology has a very particular American history in the 19th century that is rooted in so much violence. Tintype technology seems to, I know there are only a finite number of photographers in the West who use this technology. I'm familiar with Shane Balkowitz's work because I keep coming across Shane's beautiful work from his North American Plains series, in which he does tintype wet plate portraits of Native American people. This is a quote from his artist site at the bottom. My goal is to capture 1,000 Native Americans in the my captions chopped off, present rate is a 20-year commitment. The tintype is a stunning form. A little problematic, the concept of having a goal to capture 1,000 Native Americans. I know that's problematic. The tintype form is beautiful, and to Shane's great credit, if you have not seen his lovely tintype portraits of Greta Thunberg from the past year, they're really beautiful, and they are already iconic images of this young woman warrior. So I want to just give a shout out to his work. And also just another shout out to Shane's portrait of one of our friends here at Wellesley College, Chief Orville Looking Horse, Minikoji Lakota. The chief has been to Wellesley several times over the past 5 years. He's one of our distinguished visitors and guests. And Shane's tintype portraits of the chief they're beautiful, beautiful, stunning portraits. So that's not my bone to pick. But the questions that tintype photography raises for me, particularly of non-native photographers using this technology to recreate stunning portraits, it raises the question of, well, what is the difference between native and non-native photography when using the tintype? Is there a difference? Artist Gerald Clark from the Kahia tribe, he raises a fabulous question around what is Native art. And he actually has said in more than one place that you don't have to be an Indian to paint one. And I'm going to guess you don't have to be an Indian to photograph one. Gerald goes on to say that anyone can string beads, tie feathers to a dream catcher, but no one can see the world like an Indian other than an Indian. It's all about perspective. So what is the difference between a native and non-native photographer? Maybe the answer is in perspective. What's an Indigenous perspective? What does an Indigenous artist bring to the platform? Given the way that Will works with tintype technology, I just also want to briefly footnote another Native artist, the great James Luna, who just passed away in 2018. Over almost 30 years ago, James staged one of the great, now legendary, performance installation pieces called Take a Picture with a Real Indian, in which he had life-size black and white photo cutouts of himself in various types of regalia, everyday dress, and loincloth. He would stage these in galleries and also public places and invite audience members to come up and take a photo with a real Indian. And they were taken with Polaroids. He would take 2 photographs, one as a gift to give them and one to leave behind, put up on the wall. In this image, you can see the Polaroids in the back. He would always say as part of this performance, take a picture with a real Indian. Take a picture here tonight, take 2, leave 1, take 1 home. America loves to see her Indians dance with them. America loves to say our Indians. America doesn't know me. Take a picture with a real Indian. Take a picture tonight, free. He described this performance as one based upon mutual humiliation. Those who posed did not always know what they were supposed to do, but it's a fabulous and again now iconic performance piece, reperformed I think in 2010 and I think even more recently. But I was thinking about the way in which James's early work, Take a Picture of a Real Indian, as an interactive performance piece that brought an Indigenous perspective like no other before it, in a way is a precursor, sets the stage, paves the way for artists like Will to do the work that he's done. His series, Talking Tintypes, I have to tell you, blew my mind. And it was only 2 nights ago when I figured out how to download Talking Tintypes app, and I was playing with my iPhone on Will's website, and I realized that using layer codes for augmented reality, you could bring the tintypes to life. And I know that's a QR code, that's not a layer code. I was just looking for just some icon for that type of technology. I made 2 little short videos based on 2 images from his Talking Tintype series. This first one is from, it's called Insurgent Hopi Maiden, with Melissa Pokima, from a citizen of the Hopi tribe. And if you listen to her speech, you will hear shades of the Princess Leia speech that marks Star Wars: A New Hope.
Bombay, years ago you served the people in the Pueblo revolt in 1680. Now we are asking for your help in our struggle against the Gastelas who seek to destroy our world. My village is under attack with many warriors lost. I am prevented from giving you my Kikumuwe's message in person. I am afraid my mission to take you to Shimopavi has also failed. I am placing vital information to the survival of the revolt in the Knot Strands. My Kikumuwe will know how to receive it. You must see that the Knot Strand is delivered to him at Shimopavi. This is our most desperate hour. Help us, Pompey. You are our only hope.
And here's one more image from the Talking Tintype series. This one features Madrian Salgado, citizen of the Muckleshoot tribe. All right, I'll stop there, and let me just say that, Will has said elsewhere that tintypes are like time machines. They're old technologies, over 140 years old. What he does in those amazing augmented reality videos where he layers old school technology using a really old camera lens with 21st century augmented reality uh, video codes is stunning. Not only are tintypes in the Talking Tintype series time traveling machines, but they also literally bring to life those who sat quietly, silently for portraits. I find the forum just mind-blowing for how you bring together talking subjects, talking back, and movement in ways that are not just haunting, but achingly beautiful. So anyway, I'll stop there. I know I threw a lot out, and we can have a conversation.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, maybe I'll address a question or two that you brought up. You were talking early on about, I think, what does it mean to be a native photographer, kind of engaging this kind of history and using these older processes versus someone who maybe doesn't have that perspective. Um, I mean, I think for me, kind of a central theme in my use of this is thinking about how nostalgia operates, and how nostalgia potentially can be violent, in that, like, it takes away voice and agency from people, and it also kind of harkens back to this like better time. But those weren't better times. Those were really rough, like hard historical times, I think. And so, when I'm using the tintype, I'm hoping to kind of have that discussion or conversation with my subjects or sitters, and then also I think, there's kind of a performative, community-based aspect of it, and the idea of exchange and generosity, I think, is also really important in that. One of the taglines for my project is, "What if Indians invented photography?" What does it mean to create this representation of somebody that's so kind of indexically accurate? Is there kind of a danger or a power, in that object? And is there a way to, I don't know, honor that and then give that back to the person whose image it actually was? I mean, a digital facsimile is a pretty close reproduction of that as well. But I think there's something about the object nature of the tintype that I get to share with people that, I think is really important to the project, and maybe distinguishes it. The preciousness of that kind of photographic object is not kind of prioritized. But
Could you, could you say a little more about how the dynamic of reciprocity works in the tintype series? Because one of the things that really strikes me about your work, as I was reading about your relationship with the sitters and how much agency, choice, creative control they bring to the process in terms of what gets shared and literally what they take away, what you gift to them. But could you say more about the way that reciprocity works?
um, yeah, I mean, I think that this idea of sharing and the preciousness of this object, and my gifting that in some ways kind of exploding the archive. I think one of the things that I think about a lot in relation to Indigenous kind of making and photography is how a lot of Indigenous cultures have historically been oral traditions, and that, given that things aren't as fixed, they aren't as permanent, and you don't have this like record that is indexical. And maybe in the West that becomes privileged, or it's more powerful. Discourse kind of like, and power is something that circulates around these kind of fixed ideas or notions. And photography for me is something that I think about, in relation to that. And so, I'm kind of pushing against that, hopefully, and dispersing the archive. And then with the talking tintypes, maybe also kind of enabling a repertoire or a performance aspect, or giving voice or agency back to the sitters. So, I'm excited. I'm really excited about the talking tintypes, and I want to produce more of them. The project has kind of been on lockdown a little bit with the pandemic, but it'll move forward again soon.
Until I started looking at your work, I have to confess everything that I know or thought that I knew about Navajo or Diné photography, I learned either from Arlene Bowman, who is a filmmaker and photographer. Her late 1980s film, Navajo Talking Picture, is one of my favorite, based on her UCLA, I think it's her MFA project, in which she attempted to travel from UCLA to the Southwest to take photographs of her elderly Diné grandmother who did not cooperate. And then Arlene returns with her UCLA film crew, and it's an all-white film crew of really, nice students. And they're going to make a film about Arlene's grandmother. And again, the grandmother does not want to be filmed. So most of the film records the grandmother turning her back and trying to kick them out. And it's a wonderful film about the failures of trying to do a project on native photography and video making when subjects are extremely resistant, even hostile. And then also James Ferris's book, Navajo Photography. What I learned from both those projects was, I guess, a long-standing DNA protocol against image making and against the camera and against photography. And I was wondering just where your work as a contemporary photographer, as a Diné photographer, how you engage with that longstanding protocol against moving cameras and still cameras.
I mean, I think that, it's interesting because there's that, I don't know where the adage came from, but like Indigenous folks are afraid of the camera because it might steal their soul, and I think just going back to the idea of an oral tradition and being suspicious of things that so accurately fix like representation. I think that, these people were very cognizant of the power of representation and not wanting to, readily give something to someone, who they don't know and may not trust. And, so I think the photographic object is something that that deserves a certain amount of skepticism or suspicion. What are you going to do with this like very precise, accurate kind of representation of me? How is that going to be, kind of used in the world? So, I think it comes from people who are really sophisticated in terms of like thinking about how discourse operates.
And the difference between one of the most photographed Native communities by outsiders versus a whole wave of also a new generation of young artists who are taking up those tools of representation to record their own stories, document their own histories. I just love that you are using this old colonial photographic technology to create new stories. And by literally taking that giant camera apparatus you have. I'm fascinated just with the way you have to manhandle the lenses and get the chemicals set up, but you are literally, metaphorically seizing the tools, reapprehending the tools of representation that have been used for a long, long time to tell particular two-dimensional stories, about a nation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting time for Indigenous photography and practicing our practitioners right now. I mean, there's this wonderful thing that just happened called Natives Photograph, that you can Google, and there's a number of like really amazing photographers and links to their website. I guess that's the big thing now, right? We all have kind of social media and websites that kind of enable a quick and easy kind of access to that information. Yeah, I mean, there's also something I think just from a photographic standpoint, I really love about material and the materiality and kind of magic of this process and the historic process and the ability to share that in a digital age when we're all carrying these high resolution capture devices in our pockets is really kind of remarkable. I mean, there's this moment, and there's a website. I mean, on my website, there's a video of me actually walking through the whole process. There's a moment when the image is developed, it comes up as a negative image, and you rinse it off and you throw it in the fixer, and it's actually in the fixing process that this really cool thing happens where the image kind of fogs out and disappears, and then the positive version of it kind of like um, presents itself. And that moment is always just it's magical. It's like the first time you experience analog photography, and yeah. I never get tired because every time I see that, I'm like, okay, I want to do another one. I'm really excited about kind of the next possibility.
You're an alchemist. What I love about the tintypes too is they're all so different, and it's almost as if you can't until you're mixing all the solutions. It's hard to tell what you have until it emerges, but it's magical. I have a question just with one of the series that you started too. Where you use photo collage, and I think I told you in an earlier conversation that my introduction to photo collage is through Japanese American photographer Masumi Hayashi, and I didn't know that you knew Masumi's work. But actually, I have two slides. I'll just share with our audience. One is one of Will's images, and the other is from Masumi Hayashi's collage portrait of from the World War II internment camp. So let me pull that up really fast so you can. Yeah, it's from your series Air, Autoimmune Response, but I can see that this is, I can't tell if it's 180 degrees or more, but it's a collage portrait, collage self-portrait in color. And then this is an image, I'm sorry my resolution is not too sharp, but it's Masumi Hayashi's portrait of Manzanar relocation camp from 1995. It's a 360-degree panoramic photo collage pieced together with dozens and dozens of images, stitched together, quilt style, collage style. But I was stunned by just the similarity of your landscape work, and again, I didn't realize that you knew her work. But if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about this project and just her work as an inspiration or as a model.
Yeah, no, I when you brought that up, I hadn't thought about her work in a really long time, but then it made me remember seeing that because I went to Oberlin College, and she was, I think, at Cleveland State University, and so she was pretty close, and I don't know how I ran across her work. Maybe she gave a talk or something, but I do remember really being moved by it. I think at that point I was, this was kind of pre-digital, and just, kind of thinking about how you could expand the vision of something. And then I pulled up the book, but this is one of her monographs. There's a wonderful press here in New Mexico called Radius Press, and they did this book, and it's really beautiful. But she also did in a pretty expansive series of Superfund sites in the Midwest. And so I had kind of forgotten about that trajectory of her work. And, I'm doing a very similar thing with the drone survey in New Mexico. So I'm going to have to kind of revisit and delve deeper into her practice. But I think for sure, the way that she kind of expanded, the capacity of one frame of a photograph from this, strange 2x3 rectangle to, a kind of infinite view that is really like immersive, is something that I've always kind of been excited about and responded to. So like her work, and then also David Hockney, I guess, was doing a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Masumi's work on the internment camps was to replicate the 360-degree panoptic view of camp from an imagined guard tower, where internees are being surveyed 24/7 by armed guards. So she's recreating a view that she said was never one that belonged to Japanese Americans. It was a 360 view that only belonged to the state. And so it was sort of her gift back to Japanese American internees to create for them that view. And of course, she uses Camp Ruins as her site. And that project looks at all 10 of the internment camps for those just stunning landscape vistas. What she didn't have access to back then, of course, was the point of view from made possible by drone photography. And I'm really interested how drones have come now entered your own work as a new, I guess, as a new form, a new perspective, a new eye for doing the type of work you want to do. I'm fascinated with in the last part of your presentation. I love the image of the drone camera, and I also love what you're doing with those the God's eye view of those landscapes.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the technology has just enabled this different kind of perspective, and it's amazing what, just being like 50 feet up in the air, how it will translate, or how it'll transform um, a, a landscape. In the US Southwest, you're often kind of confronted with this expansive panorama, and it's hard to, it's just hard to image something. And I think that like the images from the sky of the uranium processing mill, the active ones, they've kind of intentionally created these berms so that there's no way to photograph even with a telephoto lens kind of the activity. But with a drone, it's like, you could just send that thing up there, and you know I don't know. I think it's a remarkable tool to be able to image it, particularly out here where there's such vast horizons. But yeah, I mean, I think there's also something kind of inherent about being a photographer and kind of chasing the next shiny kind of technological kind of advance or object. At least for me, kind of I was, I think, initially resistant to that actually, because I did all of my formal studies pre-digital, but now I, I just see it as a way to expand the capacity of image making. So
Hey, you have your own app. I'd say that you're all in at this point.
totally.
I have a question, since I know that you're also a teacher, and that you're working with young people, the next generation, and I would love to hear you just say a little bit about with Native students that you have, with a young rising generation. What are they most excited about? What kind of what are they excited about in terms of what stories do they want to tell? What kind of photography technologies are they most excited about learning from you? What do you see? What's coming up the pipeline with the next generation?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, something that's really exciting to me about is just this kind of like refusal to need to respond to like a historical kind of I don't know, engagement, and to move forward and just be like, okay, let's just not even think about Curtis anymore, and kind of tell our own stories from our own perspectives, and uh, kind of being empowered by that, I think is something that's excited me to see that. Uh, a recent student, now who's a colleague, and actually somebody who I collaborated with to do a two-person show that's up right now at Dartmouth at the Hood Museum. Kaylie Spitzer, she's doing some really, I think, kind of powerful work, and she also is using the wet plate process, but she's looking at kind of gender and people who kind of define themselves in a much more kind of fluid and expansive notion of, both, I think, race and gender. I mean, she's a mixed race Indigenous person, and but the focus of her work is really kind of, younger folks, younger Indigenous folks, mixed race folks, people who kind of see, I think, gender on a spectrum. And, also thinking, I think, critically about how, to some extent, that community or those communities have been situated as, deviant, I guess, historically by photography, but, just kind of pushing forward and being like, this is who I am, and this is my community, and it's beautiful, and I'm going to use this beautiful form that I really like to share that work with. It was a student who really turned me on to the drone photography. Not a native student, but a student who was using it to kind of make a living as uh, a real estate photographer, but was also doing this amazing kind of work. You could send drones in places where a helicopter can't fly. Um, he really sold me on the idea when he showed me this video where he flew through the towers of the Golden Gate Bridge with the drone. And I was like totally blown away. I mean, completely illegal, I think, but the capacity of some of this new technology is amazing. Um,
I know during the No Dapple protests in Standing Rock,
Mhm.
the drones were the game changer in terms of of, uh, the water protectors being able to document what was happening because of the news blackout. I know a lot of drones were also shot down, and a lot of drone activists were also born during that movement, 2016-17. One of my friends who was involved with some of the drone video production, Tina Puglisi, stayed on in Standing Rock and ran drone workshops for Lakota youth who wanted to learn how to use a drone, shoot videos. What I always found really interesting, her workshops were free, and guess who turned up for all those free workshops? This was in Standing Rock. They were all girls. They were all girls. They were all Lakota preteen and teen girls. So I love to think that at least in that community, that the next wave of activists, photographers, videographers will be that rising generation of woke teen girls who are excited about learning those technologies. And she said too that most drone pilots are men, and that there are very few women who are drone pilots. So, and if that's true, I love the idea of Lakota girls learning those skills and handling. And also, youth are they're so fearless with these handheld technologies. They grew up holding Nintendo. In a way that I'm petrified when I hold a controller of a drone. I'm so afraid I'm going to drop it, break it. 10-year-olds have shoved me aside to take the controllers, and they just love flying the drones and calling them home. And anyway, it's very exciting.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of an exhibition that I saw at Brown, that Adrienne Keene, who runs a blog called Native Appropriations. I think she was a co-curator of that, and it was called Drone Warriors, and it focused on like the power and potential of drone photography and how it was used by the activists to kind of give it an overall kind of perspective that wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago. And they actually had a drone, and kind of its last capture that was shot down, but it was shot at and wounded, but it made it home, and it made it home with that footage. You can see the like Marshall shooting at it. But yeah, Drone Warriors and Adrienne Keene at Brown. I think there was a website or some presence online.
I think that link is still up. I saw that exhibit before the pandemic, a beautiful, beautiful exhibit. But I think if you go on their website, it's still up. I'm paying attention to the time. We have a lot of questions and comments from our guests today. And so this might be the appropriate time to turn it back over to Carrie Cushman, who's going to moderate questions from from our audience.
Yes, thank you, Elena, and thank you, Will, for that fantastic conversation. We do have some questions, and I'll remind our audience that if you have your own, you can type them into the Q&A box and also upvote other people's questions. So the first one comes from Valerie Phillips. You briefly talked about this, Will, but I also was hoping you could dive a little bit deeper into what trans customary means
Hmm.
and what it means for you.
Yeah, there's a Maori, well, I think he's a dean now of a MFA program in New Zealand in Aotearoa, that focuses on, Maori aesthetics and contemporary art. And I think they were frustrated with this binarism between the contemporary and the traditional. And so, in the Maori language, they kind of developed these terms that kind of created more of a spectrum. And the English translation for one of them is trans customary. And so the notion is that, customary would be their term for a more traditional practice that's really kind of more historically based. And then the notion of trans customary is something that incorporates, the new. And I think it's also just kind of moving past the idea that, culture is a fixed thing and it doesn't like kind of respond and adopt and constantly change. And, that design or good design is traditional art. And it's just something that worked really well and enjoyed a history. But yeah, it's Robert Youngke's kind of term from New Zealand.
Great, thank you. Um, I realize that there is a question by Priscilla that's been upvoted, but I'm going to ask Valerie's other question now because I think it's very much related to your trans customary practice. She's asking about the object that you showed us the 2-minute video of that I believe you said was based on your grandmother's weaving. And
Hmm.
she wants to know if those were beads that were being used, and if so, what kinds of beads, what the material was made of.
Yeah, there were glass beads. There were square
Glass.
glass beads, and it's actually a Japanese company that was making these. And I think Muyaki or Munaki. I can't remember the company that was producing them, but yeah, they're these beautiful kind of square glass beads. And actually, a former kind of student and now colleague, Erica Lord, who's an Indigenous photographer and kind of multimedia artist. I saw her do this work where she was making these burden straps, which is, and kind of doing a trans customary take on these burden straps. She's Athabascan and Inupiaq. And she was doing kind of visual representation with the same glass beads of I can't remember what the term is, but there's a DNA kind of visualization process for the marker associated with diabetes. So it was making these kind of diabetes beaded woven burden straps. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I got to use that and combine it with this software that we had commissioned called Tile Pile to make that big mural. But using the same technology to kind of weave now with a smaller unit.
Wonderful. So the work itself was based off of one of your grandmother's weavings that you then recreated with these glass
Yeah, yeah,
beads.
exactly. Yeah.
And then it had the added element of the QR code with the video that would have revealed the video that you showed us.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
And most of this stuff is on the website, by the way. But
oh, okay. Which everyone should check out, definitely. um, a question from Priscilla Gray, and Elena, you should feel free to chime in too, because this is a historical question. Um, she's asking, so in the 19th and 20th century, were there any Native American photographers who were documenting their own cultures and showing their own perspectives? She says tintype was relatively inexpensive, and many soldiers, for example, had their images taken before the war. So now she's also wondering if there were any Native soldiers in the Civil War. Well, I can say that um, at the Davis Museum, we actually have a really fantastic collection of postcards that were created by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous photographers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So I know that the postcard format was a particularly popular one for Natives to photograph themselves in their own settings, how they wanted to be pictured, and then share those objects amongst their own communities. But Will, you're back.
Yeah, sorry
And
about
maybe
that.
you, that's okay. Glad you're here. And maybe you can add more to the question about early Native
Yeah,
photographers.
I should know more. I should have this readily available list. I will say that there's this really exciting project that's going to happen at the Minneapolis Institute of Art that I'm part of a kind of curatorial council on, that's going to really kind of, I think, look at contemporary Indigenous photography from North America. And it's going to have a kind of section, a well filled out section about kind of Indigenous practitioners in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And, you know, that's, I will learn more about this, but there definitely was a presence and a, you know, a bunch of practitioners who were doing that work as well.
That's very exciting. When can we expect that project to be public?
I think it's going to be in 2023, so a couple of years down the road. But I think that they're doing a really exciting kind of transformation of the curatorial process, and they're trying to kind of indigenize that, and you know, so it's they're really being generous in the way that they're sharing the production of that and incorporating so many different voices. There's about, you know, we have these big group Zooms with about 25 people kind of chiming in. I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of down the road too. But I really like this notion of kind of transformation of curatorial practice. And, you know, I think it's really appropriate for that subject too.
It sounds like something we can all learn a lot from, and I will eagerly await the final product.
One thing just to add to Priscilla's question, and hi Priscilla, I'm so glad you made it to our event today. There's a photographer of the American West that, unless you are an Asian American studies scholar, you probably have not heard of, and that is Japanese photographer Frank Matsura from the turn of the century in Eastern Washington in Idaho. Frank Matsura is contemporary with Edward Curtis, and he settled down into the sort of eastern part of Washington in Idaho, and for a brief period set up shop as the local photographer. I think it's University of Washington has the most extensive Frank Matsura online archive with I don't know, maybe 1,000+ images. But Frank Matsura's recording through photography of the American West just unravels, challenges every conventional, stereotypical, frozen in time image we have of the West, thanks to people like Curtis. Frank Matsura's photos depict a multicultural West. His subjects are the local townspeople, white ranchers, cowboys, Latino, Native, Black cowboys, women in the studio who play dress up with him, you know, in the sort of early version of photo booth. But his image of the West is one that is also filled with humanity, people, horses, dogs, children. It is an image of a multicultural West that doesn't exist in any other photographer's canon. Anyway, but he lived a short life. I think he died of tuberculosis, and when he passed away in the 19-teens, the entire town attended his memorial. White and Native they claimed him as their only Japanese. He was their little Japanese. But his photography archive is just really, really stunning and is easily available if you search online.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you for reminding me of that. I think I encountered his work for the first time when I was learning about how the West was a popular place for trans people to relocate because you could live your life there as you wanted to. And he photographed many and created portraits of many people in his studio. Um, okay, let's see. Another question from Rob Dunleavy, wondering, have you done any work in the Black Mesa Peabody coal mines in Arizona, in Kayenta, Arizona?
I haven't. I've always dreamed of doing that. I mean, I think that that mine is actually, you know, being decommissioned now. But I drive past it often. You know, and you know, we have our version of the Black Snake there. And so there's this coal-fired power plant in Page, Arizona, that is also being decommissioned, thankfully, as kind of people are wising up and shifting towards a more sustainable kind of, you know, energy sourcing practice. But the big problem with that was they were, you know, not only kind of doing the strip mining and all of the impact that that has with it, but they were using groundwater and grinding up the coal into this slurry and pumping it through this pipeline to the power generating site. And you know, they were just used, the water table has dropped because of that, because they were using so much water, you know, this incredibly valuable resource for this you know, not so great kind of source of energy and power. But yeah, the drone is actually another kind of perfect, I think, way to image some of this kind of environmental injustice and racism, because it's, you know, it's not a kind of readily available image. And I think there's, you know, security often that is like kind of poised to stop that kind of like image making. But again, the drone has an amazing capacity to do that. I mean, there is something really cool that's going on in Kanta. There's this amazing solar array, kind of new form generation station that has just been kind of developed and deployed by the Navajo Nation. And
Our last question is from Tony Pepe. It's a quite good question, asking, they say so much of your work involves a combination of photography with other media. Can you talk about the failure of photography and your impulse to incorporate other approaches into your practice? Or maybe you don't think of it as a failure, but there might be another reason for that.
um, yeah, I mean, I think I really love the kind of material investigation that artists get to do, like learning materials. And maybe, you know, this is something that separates an Indigenous kind of worldview or practice. I think that, you know, materials have agency and maybe even intelligence, and it's something that I think that, you know, people who are invested in craft and, you know, working with material really get to explore and exchange with. And so I think, you know, I think web plate definitely has that capacity, but I don't feel that with like digital photography. So, you know, the added kind of engagement with material and kind of having it respond back to you and kind of teach you and guide your practice is something that I think informs that multimedia um, work.
I so appreciate that point about the agency of materials and trusting materials and what we can learn from them in a more embodied way of learning,
Mm-hmm.
less visual, we might say. And I think that's a lovely sentiment to end this last in our first version of the Handmade Photography Today series. Uh, Will and Elena, thank you so much for your insightful conversation. I know it's the end of the semester. We've all been charging through, but I think this was a really lovely conversation, and I'm so happy we were able to make it happen all these months later. So thank you so much. Um, before we end, I'll just remind everyone that the Handmade Photography Today Virtual Artist Talk series will continue in 2021 with presentations by Zora Opoku on February 18th, Pushpamala N on March 18th, Gerardo Suter on April 22nd, and David Benjamin Sherry on May 13th. We really hope to see you all there and look forward to continuing these very important conversations at that time. So thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Will and Elena, again.
Thank you so much.
Be well. Take care, everyone. Good night.